Hi, I'm Tessa Arcilia. In Choices and Chances, I use my own style of interviewing, honed through decades as an international news presenter and correspondent, to delve into a new topic each week and interview some of the most inspiring people in the world. Life is a series of choices that give us chances to live our best lives. My goal is to turn the wisdom of people I talk to and lessons from my own experiences into ideas you can use. So if you'd like to be inspired by other stories, hit the subscribe button and join the community. Joining us today on the podcast is Jo Tarnowsky. She used to work in politics, so she was chief of staff of a minister in Australia, and she's made a complete change in her life. Jo, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tessa. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we're talking to a global audience, so you might have to, give a little bit of a background on what you were doing and what career you had. Let's start with that career, because that was a 2-decade-long career. What did that career mean to you?
Sure. So for more than 25 years, I worked for the Australian government, and about 2 decades of that was in diplomatic service. So I worked in places like Papua New Guinea, in Iraq, in Africa, India, Trinidad and Tobago, and had a final posting in Italy. So I spent a large part of my career abroad representing the Australian government, working at UN agencies on some really fascinating issues and amazing countries, learn a lot about the world. And then I came back to Australia in 2019, and I took up a job there as the Deputy Head of the Governor-General's Office. Now in Australia, the Governor-General in our constitutional system, it's a little bit like the President in some systems. We're part of the Commonwealth here, so we call it a Governor-General, and I was the first woman in almost 30 years to hold the senior executive position in the agency. And then in 2022, Australia had a federal election, and I had worked up at Parliament House in 2012-13, and I was asked to go back again as Chief of Staff to the Deputy Prime Minister. This is a job, actually, I had wanted since I was 12 years old, because I had come to Parliament House. I had met the then Prime Minister of the day, and I'd been quite inspired about being part of it. And I never wanted to be a politician. I always wanted to be the person who was an influence, I guess, on the decision maker. I didn't necessarily want to be on the TV. I didn't want to do any of those things, but making things happen behind the scenes. And so to be asked to come back and do that job was a dream come true for me, and working with somebody I had known for more than 10 years and I'd worked for before. And so that basically brings you up to the last job, and where probably you want to talk about today.
I want to establish just the career that you had, that how big a role that it played in your life, especially for people who choose to change that path at a later point in their lives, right? So I also had a 20-year career in journalism, and that meant a lot to me from an identity point of view. What was that like for you? You said you've wanted this job since you were 12. Was it actually as strongly linked to who you were and your sense of self? Was your career linked to your identity? As much as I think maybe for me it had been.
Sure. I think with any job I pour myself into, it does become part of the identity. Like I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers, work is where we spend about a third of our lives. And if you're someone who has poured your energies and passions and everything into it, it does naturally become part of who you are. In diplomatic service, I think there can be a bit of a misnomer about what that looks like, and you probably saw it too from your international career. There's sort of an image there that doesn't always fit behind the scenes, but it's not all cocktail parties. There is a range of really important work that gets done in terms of negotiating with other countries. I was deployed to war zones, crisis zones, working on human rights abuse sort of updates and things in parts of my job, kidnapping cases, major events with world leaders. There was a whole range of things that happened behind the scenes, including consular assistance, where we help, which is actually part of the job I really loved, because you could see how it impacted people and you helped people. And it could be anything from a lost passport or something that had turned their lives upside down, through to really life-changing moments. And being that person or part of that service that could help them at that time of need. So yeah, so for part of me, I got to do some amazing things, meet some really impressive people with amazing titles in amazing places in the world. And it was my life for more than 20 years.
You were clearly very passionate about the topics you covered and the issues that you shed a light on. What part of the job felt hard?
I think sometimes there's an image that goes with it, and some of the places that I served in weren't the easiest places. So I was held up at gunpoint more than once. So I narrowly avoided a kidnapping attempt, and I was deployed to Iraq, where you learn skills that I'd never thought I'd need, but you learnt even how to decipher noises from your office chair as to whether it was a car bomb or a rocket or something else. And so those are experiences that, again, test you and teach you, like so many things in life. I had gone into Iraq the first time thinking it would be just something I would do once. And it was really interesting because I found that I not only survived, but I thrived in that environment. The type of people that you work with, the type of issues that you are working on, all of those things. And it was the same in Zimbabwe when I was held up at gunpoint by some of Mugabe's side people that were there to protect him. And again, in Trinidad and Tobago, kidnapping attempt in Kenya. I worked in Fiji after coups. In Papua New Guinea, I mean, you work in some incredible places which at the time didn't even have electricity turned on for more than a couple of hours a day. And so everywhere I went, I met amazing people and I worked on different things, and they all had an impact, I guess, on who I am today and the experience I brought to every table.
How do you have a normal life with the kind of work that we had, and we were exposed to difficulties in human experience and suffering around the world? It can be difficult to detach from that, and it feels a bit strange for me. Maybe I don't know about your experience, but it's just weird going back into your daily life and then just compartmentalizing what you experience and what your life is about. So what about you? How did you, given that you had an attempted kidnapping, you were held at gunpoint, I think those are quite traumatizing experiences. How do you have a normal life?
One of the things that was sort of surprising to me is sometimes I think, so more of the challenge was not being in Iraq, for example, but it was coming out of it. I think you psychologically prepare to go into an environment like that, into a war zone. You're surrounded by people who are all hearing the same explosions, who are wearing the same kit. You're all in that experience together. And if anything, I found like they would give you decompression leave. And I found that the importance of that was actually when you came out, because I could be in a really dusty airport surrounded by the military in the morning. And then by the time I had flown back to a separate country, which at that time was Kuwait, you put up in a hotel with these beautiful sheets and having room service. And from morning to night, your life has completely changed. And if anything, sometimes it's the shock of coming out of it, which reminds you, oh, that's not normal, because you actually do so much preparation going in. And surrounded by people who kind of get it, who take the security environment seriously, that sometimes it's the unexpected things that can make you sort of stop and catch your breath. I think, yes, it kind of made me very resilient though, and I think you end up with a threshold for certain things where you've seen real troubles in the world, and you've seen people suffering, and that then becomes something that you come back to Australia, for example, and you really appreciate the small things. Like I remember just freely going for a walk around the lake here in Canberra, and I didn't have to worry about anybody shooting me or carjacking me or anything like that, drinking water from a tap, breathing fresh air, the blue skies. So I think sometimes it's an appreciation for the smaller things that when you live here long term and maybe you don't have those travel experiences that you might take for granted everywhere.
And given the state of the world, how do you make sense of going back to your reality, knowing that the reality that you just came back from is someone else's 24/7. That I find it a bit hard. So how do you make sense of that?
That's true. I think it can hit you in different ways. There's two examples that kind of come to mind. One was actually where war in Ukraine broke out. So my husband's family originally came from Ukraine, and when we had lived in Italy, we had taken the opportunity to go there and introduce my daughter there, and we had a lovely time, and we met people there that we kept in contact with. So that definitely brought a reality to it when that situation happened, not only because we knew people, but I think for my husband, for example, it hit him in a way that not every conflict on the news might, because he knew he was just a generation away from being in that situation himself. And we knew the people there were faced with impossible choices. Whether you chose to leave that day or whether you chose to stay, your life would not be the same. In a similar way, here back in Canberra, sometimes when I was working at DFAT, as we call it, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, you'd be called into crisis work. So it's 24/7 because the crisis centre's been activated. And you're seeing it play on the news. You know you're working on a high-profile issue. You're talking on the phones to people impacted. You're working on something that seems deeply relevant. And if anything, again, it's a little bit like that experience coming out of Iraq, where they pull you off the crisis shifts and put you back to your everyday job. That is actually the moment that can be hard to adjust to, because suddenly your paperwork doesn't seem quite so relevant. There isn't that adrenaline drive behind it. You actually want to be back in the crisis, on the crisis force in some ways, or task force. And so sometimes you're right, there is that adjustment, but I often found that it wasn't while it was in it, it was when you sort of then came out of it and had to readjust again.
So just to give a brief background, you made a career pivot. I think one question coming from me would be, did you see that coming? Did you see that pivot happening in your life? And then I'll give you the floor to decide where to start that part of your story.
I think the best way to describe it is actually the title of your podcast, which I think is fantastic in terms of choices and chances. So all of us will have things in our lives that happen to us that are unexpected. And we are faced with a choice of then how we respond to it and what we do to it. So for your audience, many of whom are not necessarily in Australia, I was working at Parliament House. I worked in, some of the rooms, as Hamilton might say, where the decisions are made. It is something I had worked to and aspired to all my life. I loved my job, and one day my life changed, and that was when I raised an issue with my boss about some behaviour I was experiencing in the workplace that was impacting me. I had tried to manage it for a while, and I felt I was safe to raise it, and I was met with unexpected consequences for doing so. And so in a nutshell, what happened was that I was put on automatic leave. When I tried to come back, I was told I couldn't. I was confused and traumatized. I didn't quite know what to do. I hid it and covered it because I've always been a high performer. I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. I was isolated. And so even though I had been through these very hard things before, I've got to say I'd never actually experienced trauma to that degree. The nightmares, there was a whole range of things that came through it. And the load of covering also became just extraordinary, because I had a job, of course, that if I went out into the community after hours, people would see me walking the dogs or having a coffee somewhere. They would naturally ask, Jo, how's the job going? And so over time, my world became smaller and smaller. And so then I was faced with a choice. I was being pushed out, and there was a choice, obviously, to go quietly, or there was a choice to stand up and say something on the way out, because for, again, the people that are not from Australia, over the last few years in Australia, we've had an enormous body of work that has been done around the safety of the parliamentary workplace. And, more than 1,700 people had come forward as part of a formal review called the Jenkins Review, which is better known as the Set the Standard report, because government actually had heard, particularly from women and parliamentary staffers, about various experiences and had promised to set the standard for the rest of the country. And here I was with all those promises in a government that had promised to set the standard, and I was locked out of my office. I had been treated appallingly, and it wasn't fixed. And so I felt not only for myself that I needed to stand up and say something, but also to basically tell other people it's not fixed. This is window dressing, and I am the most senior female chief of staff on the Hill. The Deputy Prime Minister in our system is only second to the Prime Minister. I knew that by standing up, I was not just standing up to my own boss. You take on what you call the whole show, the whole party. And so it wasn't for the faint of heart, but to be presented with that decision as well, or to walk away, I felt that the trauma that I was already experiencing of covering the situation would only worsen if I walked away without raising the flag, because I'm a very values-driven person and what was happening was not right. I knew there were a few other staffers that had some bad experiences. They were too junior, too frightened of the power to say anything. And so I made the life-changing, extremely difficult choice to stand up. And that was in October 2024. If you look at the footage, I've never watched it actually because it wasn't my dream to be on TV. I remember shaking. I remember trembling. I remember standing up and doing it anyway.
Was it a hard decision? What was that like, getting to the point of saying, I'm going to do it?
The turning point for me was actually my daughter, who had just turned 11. And I think she had seen the impact on me at home. Where I would put on a brave face, you go out into the world, but you would crumble at home. And she had seen that. And I just remember her cuddling up to me one Saturday when I was in a really deep hole. And she just said, Mum, maybe if you tell someone, maybe someone would help you. And that was one of those moments that just stopped me for so many reasons. I mean, firstly, we teach our kids to stand up to bullying or other bad treatment. We tell them there's no secret too big not to share. She's got years of high school ahead of her, and how could I possibly get her to do any of that if I wasn't walking the talk? But I'd also got myself into some very dark holes, and I was getting worried that there might be one I couldn't pull myself out, and I owed it to her to do everything I could. So I feel like the decision to step forward was made, but then it was, what does that look like? And the fact is, I didn't go to the media straight away. I actually went and spoke to someone in the show, as they call it. I found a female minister who I had felt that I could trust. And that person was amazingly good to me. They did go and make representations at the Prime Minister's office. It wasn't their problem to fix, but, things still didn't happen. And 3 weeks later, I decided to go public. So I felt by that point I had done everything I could behind the scenes. And that was the last thing before I knew that I'd be pushed out completely. And so I think the decision can be made, but I also wasn't naive about what I was up against. These are the most powerful people in Australia. They have media connections. They're the government. And so I knew that, and so I needed to be prepared. And so those preparations took a few weeks. I managed to find a few wonderful people in my corner. I found a lawyer who could help me manage the media and the politics as well as the law, who was also a very purpose-driven individual. That was a game changer. I found a journalist who I gave the story to, and I felt replicated it, because you're trusting them quite a bit to be able to convey your story when you're swimming in trauma yourself. And so a few things like that, and a few really good friends, and obviously my family who knew what was happening. We kept it very quiet, and then I stepped forward. But I knew what I was up against. Even in that first press conference, I remember saying, even though I wrote the speech, so I remember it, even though I haven't watched it again. I remember saying, you watch what happens now. They will circle around to protect him and their own power. And that's exactly what happened. No one, I knew all the ministers by first names pretty much, and, nobody reached out to see how I was, even though I'd been shaking and trembling. The system went silent, and that's what happens. I mean, I have learned so much through this about how it happens, and the system steps in to protect itself, not you. And it's strange because even though that deepens the isolation in some ways, I'd felt an enormous load lift from the moment I stepped forward because I no longer had to hide. I felt the weight lift. I felt I could walk the dogs again and bump into people, and I didn't have to. I'd been true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of things coming to mind when you were saying that. One, that, and here you are, a senior official in the very same political circle, having to deal
Yeah.
with this. What hope do ordinary people have in this case? So, what I took away from what you said, would your advice be, if you were up against some situation like this, the first thing you do is you find people in your corner? Is that what you do? Do you find people who would believe in you and then you step forward? Because you were prepared, you weren't naive about this, but you needed powerful enough people, a lawyer, a journalist. Is that some practical advice you can give? Because it is scary to think, if someone like you had this difficulty, what would non-political people have in their toolkit?
Absolutely. And so I've actually spent a long time over the last year learning so much. Sadly, toxic work environments are everywhere. They're not unique to politics. I've been contacted since I stood up by so many people privately. So finding your people is absolutely one of the takeaways. I think one of the struggles early on, though, is the nature of toxic workplaces. They can be hard to understand ourselves. I think because of gaslighting, because of just the way that they operate, it can be hard for people to articulate at first what's going on, and giving the benefit of the doubt. And maybe it's just me, and maybe they didn't mean to keep me off that email or keep me out of that conversation or not invite me to that meeting. Maybe it was a mistake. And you get a bit of a sense that there's some smearing going on. But it's a little bit different from, say, when we're younger. And if you're targeted when you're younger, say in a schoolyard, it is often more overt. You can touch it and feel it. There might be name calling, pranks. There's things you can describe, and I think too. So while it's often driven by insecurity, the targets are often difference, or it's a weakness of some kind when you're younger. When you're older, I think insecurity is still a driver for why you become a target, but often and difference still remains a reason why people are targeted. But instead of the weakest, it's often the high-performing ethical people, the ones that might be a threat to others because they're well-liked or they're performing well, or maybe they're calling out things, or they've got standards that don't protect the status quo, right? So this then becomes a shock because it's not part of your identity, as you've said, for you to be in this situation. But also the tactics behind it, because it isn't something that happens in one big incident. It eats away at you over time. It's almost like you wake up after a long period of time and it's overwhelmed you. And it can be hard because you go home and you can't quite understand it, and you might get well-meaning advice from people, from friends or family that are just ignore them. Or, and for me, I had a saying, keep yourself tidy. I tried not to give it airtime. And yet I still found myself in this position. And so it became very difficult to trust people and to be able to find those people, because I didn't even understand what was happening myself, let alone to articulate. And so this is really common. And I think when you can sort of separate your identity, that's the key. When you understand it's a system at play, that you've been targeted, I think sometimes language can be important. You're not a victim, you've been targeted. And then you work out how that plays. I've been speaking to psychologists, academics, all sorts of people that specialise in this area. Some of them I've met on LinkedIn, and in fact, sometimes I've read a post where it was like they're in the room. They literally said that to me, and I've reached out to the person and they've just been, well, it's like a playbook. Once you understand how it works, it's pretty easy to predict. So this also brings me into some of the work that I'm doing now. It's to help raise awareness both in workplaces as well as individuals that have been impacted, that they're not alone. The true nature of how these sorts of things, the dynamics behind what they work, how they work, but also why it impacts people so badly. And finding your people, as you say, is a huge part of your recovery. People that you can trust. You don't need a lot of people. You just need the right people. You don't need a crowd, but it can be a couple of trusted friends who just help you see your value behind, like beyond this experience. And then, of course, professionals like therapists, maybe a lawyer, if that's where you think that, you should go. It's sort of a small group of trusted people to help you find your way through this experience safely into the other side.
Do you have enough faith in the system? Because you mentioned that the system was at play and that was where the problem was. But do you have enough faith in the system to tell other people to speak up as the choice that could shed a light on the problem? Because a lot of people decide not to speak up precisely because they don't trust the system, that the system will not protect them. What advice would you give from that point of view?
The most important thing is there's no one size fits all for everybody's circumstance. So I actually do not give, this is the one way to do it. It really depends on your circumstances, your support networks, your finances, how you are, like how far down the track you are and how your health is. It's what country you're in and what sort of protections there might be. There are a range of factors that can play in. I am sometimes contacted by people who are very, they're values driven as well, and they want to call it out. And they want to go to the media, and I usually just make sure, again, that is a decision for them, but people need to go into that with their eyes wide open as to what that involves and the pros and cons of that approach. Like you'll notice I didn't do it straight away. It was a long period of time. And so I don't make those decisions for people or tell them one way. It's about making a decision that feels right for them with all the information they need to make a good decision for themselves. And so I've actually put together something called Recovering from a Toxic Workplace, which is to help people. It's a video series as well as a written guide, which runs through some of these issues. I just became aware of all this terminology I'd not known before. Like we might have heard of bullying or gaslighting, but things like mobbing, scapegoating, there's all these dynamics at play that, again, you can read the definitions and work out where you might fit. And in this guide, it took me a long time to kind of work out podcasts, articles, books, social media accounts to follow. And I've sort of brought those all together in one place too, because I know how isolating it is, and being able to access a resource like that, I couldn't find anything like it when I was going through it. And of course I was in a high profile position, which added to the load of feeling I couldn't say anything. I'm just trying to help the next people because it's not unique to politics. There's some industries where the data shows it is more prevalent, but I don't think any particular industry is immune from this happening. And so like anything, you want to shine a light on it. And I also want to help workplaces understand how it works, because I think if you understand, you can help get ahead of those dynamics and read them for what they are and protect the people who actually need to be protected, because more often than not, it is the victim or the target that is pushed out of the workplace and the culture continues.
And I guess one of the impacts that it can have on people is really the effect on their self-worth, because you said you were in a dark place. How do you get out of that? What is the first step for people who, I know case by case basis, but if you are in that dark place and your self-worth has been really impacted, what do you do first?
Yep. So I did engage a psychologist early. And again, that was part of my little support crew. And she was amazing. I think sometimes finding the right therapist is really good. You're in a trusted space there. She helped me understand without knowing the people involved, the type of personalities, and that helped me understand things. Yeah, one of the things I didn't mention to you earlier on in terms of some of the difficult things I've been through before, I've been through cancer before. Like that is difficult too. I've been through hard things before. I would say this is deceptively difficult, and sadly that's not an uncommon experience. I know my family had to go away on a family reunion for a week at one point in the middle of it before I'd gone public. And, I had to promise them that if I found myself in a hole I didn't think I could get out of, I would go to the hospital. Like, that is how badly it impacts. And so I'm open about that only because I don't want people to feel alone, that even if you've been through hard things before, these kind of experiences can rock you to the core. And so I think if you try and fight that or downplay it, it will only exacerbate your trauma. Whereas if you can acknowledge this is a thing, okay, and I'm not alone and I will be believed, and these are the dynamics at play, I am hoping that I help become the stepping stone for someone to be able to ask for help or to confide in a trusted person about what's going on, that they will be believed and they'll be able to articulate it in words that will help people understand.
At the end of the day, looking back at it, because it is still quite fresh, we're not even through the year yet. And I don't want to talk about the legalities, but I would like to know whether you are in a position right now where you feel there has been some sort of justice in some ways, or at least for yourself inside, that, okay, I wasn't imagining things, I wasn't, just to give yourself, to validate what you had gone through. Are you content or happy? I mean, maybe happy is a strong word, with where the case is or where the situation is now, and so you can move on?
So I wouldn't use the word happy. I think I became resolved about what I could achieve and not. So that involved me changing the goalposts and accepting the world the way it was, not the way I wanted it to be. So when I stood up for that first press conference, all I wanted was an apology and some accountability. That's it. That's all I wanted. And then they shut down. We found it hard to even get a receipt of, acknowledgement of receipt of our correspondence. It became more difficult. And by the end of the year, I'd actually had to make a decision in another world I never thought I'd be in, where I actually sued the government, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff in the Federal Court of Australia. Again, not on my bucket list for 2024. And again, every time you just had to sort of look at these difficult cards put in front of you. You didn't want to be in the situation, but you just had to work out which one you would move forward with. I think by the time I'd hit that, I found that the legal system was pushing me increasingly into monetary resolution, whereas I knew there was no amount of money in the world that would actually make it okay. And that was very difficult, but it was also one of the reasons why eventually I settled the matter, because if it had gone to court, it would have been another year. It would have been a very high-profile case just to hear, at best, a judge say I was right, which I felt like I knew, and maybe just cover my own costs. But the everyday trauma for anyone who's been through a legal case before, it is relentless. It is like getting an email. I would have to calm myself down, go walk around the block with the dogs just to settle my nervous system, because you just feel like you're under attack. It is so combative. And so learning what I could salvage. So apology, never going to get it. Accountability, well, that depends on who delivers it. If you're looking for them to, no, I'd be still in it now if that's what I dug in on. But I felt I had done everything to call them accountable, and I had called it out. So then there were a few things behind the scenes that I have walked away feeling validated by what happened to me. That doesn't mean to say that I was fine by the way the case ended, which was about 6 months ago. But it's certainly, I guess we come back to choices. I have resolved and made choices that I did everything that I could. And then I made a good choice by taking a break. And that was on the advice of good friends who just said, Jo, we know you throw yourself into work, take a break. And I did, and I went on hikes. I went to Tasmania and into the outback, and I had peace, and I had And it allowed my nervous system to settle. I went and did some courses and I met new people. People would ask me for coffee and I had a policy of saying yes. And it gave me time to think more deeply about what I wanted to do from here, because it was life-changing.
I remembered on LinkedIn, I said, "Oh, who is Jo?" And I saw your political career, and I didn't know yet that you were working on what you're working on now, your course, and to help other people. Are you surprised at the attention and the number of people reaching out to you? Because basically you took your experience and now you're putting it into an avenue that seems to be working for you. And I think your story gives hope to people who might have had to leave whatever career they had or situation they had, not because they planned to, and turning it into something that actually works for you. It seems like a new career in the making. Is that where you are now?
So it's really interesting actually how that happened. The break was good, like I said. Running my own business, having my own website, these aren't worlds that I expected myself to be in. But again, the cards are dealt and you've just got to take the time to work out what are you going to do. And when my case ended, I'd actually said to my lawyer, I just want to make it easier for the next person, knowing there would be another person and one after that. And I meant probably to do more with Parliament House at that point. And I probably felt like I had done enough by that point. And as we've talked about, I have a long career doing other things. And I didn't want to be known actually for this one thing that had happened to me. And so probably my instinct at that time was to do something else, even though I didn't quite know what that was. Probably capitalize on my international relations background, something like that. But I hadn't quite got to that point. But I had known enough in my gut. I could have gone back to a public service career because, and that was an option for me. But I think through what happened, I found my voice. Anybody who's worked for government, whether it's in Australia or elsewhere, knows your views are subject to talking points, government policy, and in fact, you've almost got to switch off because you're apolitical, serve the government of the day, all of those things. And like you've mentioned, there's so many things happening in the world right now, not just this, not just toxic workplaces, where I feel a voice is of value, and my voice had come out of the jar, and I couldn't fathom a world in which I could just put it back in like this had never happened. So at that point, I already made the decision to walk away, even though, which was a scary world for me to be in because I didn't know what next looked like. And so actually LinkedIn was a game changer for me too, because even though I wasn't posting about what happened to me, I would more post that I'd gone to a writers' festival or I'd met up with somebody this week. I was liking and commenting on a whole range of posts which was talking about various aspects of toxic workplaces. And I regularly had people reaching out to me saying, thank you for your activity. And I'm learning so much about my own situation because of what you're doing. And like, it really, I mean, there were so many people that it made me realize I was actually performing a different type of public service. These are people who couldn't afford for their bosses to see them like or comment, but they were stuck in somewhere where they didn't know who to trust. And simply because I'd stepped forward, I guess they found me someone that they could share. And I'm really grateful that they told me they were watching those things, because I wouldn't have expected when my case ended to lean into this work, but I knew that I wanted to have purpose and impact and positively impact people's lives. And I became aware probably as late as July, I worked out, actually, if I want to really help people in this world, instead of closing the chapter on this, I actually need to lean in and I need to help people, because I've learnt so much and there is a way that I can help others through what I've learnt. And so, yes, I've chosen to lean in. It's not the only thing I do. If you go to my website, I still, I'm doing some strategic advice. I do speaking. I do a range of other things. I'm on boards supporting an organisation called Future Females Australia. I do a range of things, but I've created resources and I am leaning into helping people who are impacted, traumatised, isolated, whether they're still in it or they're in the aftermath of it and they still don't quite understand why.
I think you just verbalize what I always tell people who I work with, or just the commentary I put out there on LinkedIn and on socials, is when you want to figure out who you are, because now you're not Jo, chief of staff working at Parliament, you're Jo, entrepreneur, businesswoman, speaker, this and that. It isn't the title that matters. You just said what you wanted to do. You wanted to help people. That's your main
Yep.
purpose. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Parliament or in front of your computer creating courses, that you go back to that goal, that vision. At the same time, did you ever go through a phase of just struggling to define who you are? Like, hey, Jo, who are you? Where do you work? What do you do?
I don't think it happened in a single moment. I knew that life would be different. At that point of acceptance I came to earlier, I knew I didn't want to go back into government, at least for this next season of my life, however long that lasts. Never say never is what I've learned. But I didn't know much before that. And it was almost like, because I'd deliberately taken this 6-month break, the pieces came to me. And I guess I just needed to be aware of it and to be open to it, that life would look different. And it didn't necessarily need to be bad. It would just be different. And you don't lose any of those experiences. You bring them with you, all those, the 20 years. It helps you in different ways. But I guess it was just, again, accepting the world for the way it was, not the way I wanted it to be, and being brave enough to step into something new that I didn't necessarily associate with my identity, like you said, because I didn't see myself as a businesswoman or anything like that. But one of the things I did know is, when you're a leader, it actually doesn't matter where you sit on an organisation chart. You do not have to be the CEO. You do not have to be the top. It's the way you live your life. That's who you are. And so in that way, it doesn't matter what title I have. It's about what I do and who I am.
For anyone listening who might be in the position where you were last year in October, thinking about, what am I going to do now? What words of wisdom would you give to them?
The first thing is, if they've lived through an experience like mine, you're not alone. You do need to find your people, but there is a pathway forward and you deserve it. It was about them. It wasn't about you. It's a system, and there is a way that you walk into a new workplace stronger and better from it, but you need to take the time to acknowledge what happened to you first. And I think we get one life, so live it purposefully. And I think sometimes being open that might look differently in different seasons of your life, be open to that, because it is not worth staying somewhere toxic, staying somewhere stale, staying somewhere where you can't make that positive impact on people or the world around you.
And if you could put that in the words of choice, what were the choices that you needed to make?
The biggest choices I made, looking back, there were probably 3. The first was to step up and say something. That's not going to be right for everybody. I feel it was right for me, and I'm quite resolved with that, despite the consequences. The second one was, instead of taking the safety of a public service paycheck, that the value, I made choices by values, and there was a value beyond finances about having my own voice. So stepping away from government work at the end of my case was a choice I'm also very comfortable with. And then the third choice was actually leaning in to help others, which, to be honest, I feel in some ways I might have been a bit of a slow learner, because people who know me well sort of know my character and not helping and not wanting to make things better for others. This is part of who I am, and so it's probably not a surprise to them. I guess for me, it was just, I know I have so much more to offer, but then if what I want to offer is about making things easier and better for others, there's no better way than to take this difficult experience, take this pain, and turn it into purpose.
Right. Thank you so much, Jo, for your time today. I'm really glad we crossed paths on LinkedIn, of all places.
Yes.
So thank you so much again.
To connect with me as well. And yeah, which is great. And I'm on Instagram as well now too. It's a brave new world for me. I haven't done that before either. And so that's wonderful. And if anybody is looking for help, I do have resources on my website. And actually, Tessa, I've sent you through a code for anybody that's listening, a discount code as well, so that people can access it after listening to this, so they can get help. It's on-demand videos and it's a written guide. And it just means you can watch it at your own pace, you can absorb the details, and hopefully help you move forward and get the help you need to live a better life than perhaps the things that have happened to you.
Thank you so much, Jo.
Thanks, Tessa. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating so others can find the podcast. Thank you for your company and see you next time.